Have you ever imagined that a tax war between the US and Canada could drive up food prices, disrupt the tourism industry, and even push Alaska's economy to the brink of collapse? Trump signed an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on imported goods from Canada. The goods affected include steel, aluminum, and other industrial products. The stated reason is to protect U.S. industries from unfair competition and address issues related to drug smuggling through the northern border. However, these measures are not simple. The U.S. is not only confronting Canada, but now this war has entered a new phase, directly threatening Alaska's economy, which heavily relies on trade routes through Canada. Immediately, Canada responded strongly.
Following a dollar-for-dollar approach, will be imposing, as of 12:01 a.m. tomorrow, March 13th, 2025, 25% reciprocal tariffs on an additional $29.8 billion of imports from the United States.
Canada imposed a $30 billion retaliatory tariff on U.S. goods. The affected products range from fruit juice, wine, household goods, to cosmetics and paper products. However, these retaliatory measures aren't stopping at the federal level. Provinces in Canada, including British Columbia, BC, Ontario, and Quebec, have started rolling out their own strategies to counter U.S. tariffs. We must pay particular attention to British Columbia, the largest province on the western side of Canada, which has introduced an extremely bold retaliatory measure, a tariff on U.S. commercial trucks passing through the province to reach Alaska.
Is set to introduce legislation that would allow the province to charge U.S. commercial trucks driving to Alaska through BC. Premier David Eby made the announcement shortly after the U.S. paused tariffs on some Canadian goods.
This could lead to an increase in shipping costs for goods from the U.S. to Alaska, which in turn would raise the prices of essential items like fresh food, cosmetics, and electronics. This is not an easy measure. According to experts, if this measure is enforced, shipping costs will skyrocket, and you can imagine this increase will be passed on to the prices of consumer goods, making life difficult for Alaskan residents, especially those living in remote areas where road delivery is mandatory. To better understand, you need to know that Alaska depends on the Alaska Highway, a route approximately 2,450 kilometers long, running through British Columbia and Yukon, connecting Alaska to the rest of the U.S. Every year, 80% of goods transported from the U.S. to Alaska must pass through these routes. The new tariffs on U.S. trucks will drive transportation costs up significantly, making essential items like fresh vegetables, fresh meat, milk, and other goods much more expensive. The issue doesn't stop at shipping goods. Alaska's tourism industry, a key economic sector for the state, will also be affected. Most cruise ships traveling to Alaska must stop at ports in Canada before continuing their journey.
I think it's his demented way of going, oh, I can negotiate if I put tariffs on things, but I don't support it. And the people don't feel that way with each other. We notice the effects. There's a lot of Canadians that are...
With strong retaliatory measures from Canada, especially British Columbia, Alaska could face an economic crisis. The transportation system, supply chains, and the tourism industry could all be disrupted. The Alaska government needs to work with Canadian leaders to address this issue as soon as possible. Otherwise, Alaska will continue to face severe consequences for prices and the economy in the coming months. Stay tuned to the video, as the upcoming developments will leave you shocked, and you won't want to miss the far-reaching effects of this trade war on the economy and our lives. Trump once said that the U.S. doesn't need Canadian oil, but now he's calling for the revival of Keystone XL. Is this decision a strategy to make the U.S. energy independent, or is it a big mistake?
After insisting the U.S. does not need Canadian energy, Donald Trump is renewing the call to build the Keystone XL pipeline.
After being re-elected, Donald Trump made a decision that surprised many. He returned to the idea of reviving the Keystone XL project. This is completely contrary to his previous statements, when he had asserted that the U.S. didn't need oil from Canada. But why this change? After the Biden administration canceled the permit for the project in 2021, Trump argued that restoring Keystone would help the U.S. achieve energy independence and reduce reliance on OPEC countries. He even called Biden's decision devastating to the economy, and demanded that companies begin construction immediately. Canada is the largest supplier of crude oil to the U.S., accounting for about 60% of total oil imports, equivalent to more than 4 million barrels per day. Heavy oil from Canada is crucial for U.S. refineries, especially when it suits the refineries specialized in processing heavy crude from oil sands. Although cheaper, crude oil from Canada is an essential component in the U.S. energy supply chain. Therefore, restoring Keystone will help maintain this stability.
President Trump looking to revive the Keystone XL pipeline project. It was axed on President Biden's first day in office due to the opposition from environmental activists. Fired pipeline worker.
Although restoring Keystone XL could bring thousands of jobs and help the U.S. reduce its reliance on energy from unstable countries, environmentalists and indigenous communities have a different perspective. They are concerned that the extraction of oil sands will increase greenhouse gas emissions, which will exacerbate the effects of climate change. The protests from indigenous communities are also very strong. They are concerned that building Keystone will threaten their traditional lands and their sacred areas, especially when the pipeline will pass through regions like the Nebraska Sand Hills, where there is a significant risk to important water sources. Extracting oil sands from Alberta could produce emissions up to 81% higher than conventional crude oil. This not only impacts the environment, but also causes the U.S. to go against its commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions under international agreements like the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. Many studies have shown that if oil extraction from sands is not reduced, the U.S. may not meet its goal of cutting emissions by 50% by 2030. The Keystone XL project also faces strong opposition from indigenous communities. These groups argue that the project infringes on their rights, as the pipeline will pass through their lands, potentially causing serious damage to their cultural, religious, and traditional heritage.
Helper after having our little boy, to have that future just completely taken away just by one signature.
The future ain't looking so bright. I mean, it's hard to make plans when you've got an administration that's trying to crush your future.
Some indigenous communities have filed lawsuits to stop the project and protect their rights, claiming that the project violates land and resource agreements, while also harming their rights to environmental protection. They are also concerned that the presence of Keystone XL will increase discrimination and escalate social issues, especially since the project is being carried out without consulting them. While reviving Keystone XL may bring short-term economic benefits, the environmental risks and the discontent of indigenous communities are factors that cannot be ignored. Increasing reliance on oil is not a sustainable strategy, especially as the world is shifting strongly towards renewable energy and addressing climate change. Stay tuned to the video to learn more about the far-reaching impacts that this project could bring. After Canada announced a $760 billion USD plan to retaliate against Trump's tariffs, the EU quickly responded with a $40 billion USD retaliatory tariff package. Is this the beginning of a global trade war? The European Union didn't take long to respond. Right after President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, the EU quickly introduced a 26 billion euro retaliatory tariff package, equivalent to about $40 billion US dollars.
Similar to Canada's, they've been very quick and very strict, announcing retaliatory duties on industrial and farm products totaling 26 billion euros.
The products targeted include industrial items like machinery, cars, and agricultural goods like fruits, vegetables, and wine. Recently, the EU has imposed tariffs on over 2,800 U.S. products, including items like Levi's jeans, whiskey, and Boeing spacecraft. U.S. businesses, particularly in agriculture and industry, will face significant losses due to the loss of export markets. And not only that, they will also face increased production costs. Trade between Canada and the EU has grown by 7% since the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, took effect. A wave of Canadian businesses has quickly taken advantage of this agreement, shifting from the U.S. to potential markets in Europe and Asia. What will the future hold for U.S. businesses? Mexico, one of the U.S.'s largest trade partners and the second largest steel exporter, has chosen a slow and steady approach in its response. They didn't rush to impose retaliatory measures immediately. The Mexican government, under President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, decided to negotiate and seek a peaceful solution. But at the same time, they didn't rule out the possibility of imposing tariffs on U.S. goods if necessary. However, Mexico isn't just facing the impact of U.S. tariffs, but also dealing with a decline in exports and the escalating trade tensions that could greatly affect its economy. Analysts forecast that Mexico's steel industry will need to reduce output, while the agricultural sector will face significant challenges, dealing with higher tariffs on products like tomatoes and avocados. The situation in Brazil is not much different. As the second largest steel exporter to the U.S., Brazil is trying to find a way to respond to this decision. Brazil's finance minister, Fernando Haddad, criticized the U.S. tariffs as unreasonable and wrong, and declared that they would seek legal measures at the World Trade Organization, WTO. However, like Mexico, Brazil has decided not to rush into retaliation, but instead will patiently pursue negotiation options to avoid escalating tensions. Tariff retaliations not only affect the partner countries, but also have a significant impact on U.S. businesses. The steel industry will be one of the most affected sectors, as the new tariffs will raise the cost of imported steel, increasing production costs in U.S. factories. This not only drives up product prices, but also diminishes the competitiveness of U.S. products in the international market. The EU has shown strength in this decision and has not hesitated to respond forcefully.
Is to counterbalance the increased trade value affected by the US tariffs while minimizing the impact on European businesses and consumers. But the disruption caused by tariffs is avoidable if the US administration accepts our...
However, the issue is not just about the tariffs, but also the political relationship. EU countries have agreed that the U.S. tariff policy not only has a negative impact on the global economy, but also disrupts stability in international trade relations. Stay tuned, because the twists and turns could impact you. Ontario Premier threatens to cut off electricity to the U.S. If trade war escalates, could the U.S. face a widespread power outage? Ontario, a major electricity supplier to the U.S., is threatening to cut off supply if tariffs continue to escalate. Today, the Ontario Premier announced that he would not hesitate to halt electricity exports to the U.S. if Washington continues imposing tariffs on Canadian goods. Is this a strong countermeasure or a risky move for both sides? Ontario strikes back. 25% tariff on electricity exports. This is no longer a warning, it's a reality. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has officially imposed a 25% tariff on electricity exports to the U.S. This means $400,000 per day. The additional amount that American businesses and households will have to pay, $100 per month. The average increase in electricity bills for households relying on Ontario's power supply. Who will be hit the hardest? 1.5 million American homes and businesses that depend on Ontario's electricity. Minnesota, Michigan, and New York will be the most affected states as they rely heavily on Canadian power. But this is just the beginning. Doug Ford has made it clear. If the U.S. continues imposing tariffs, we are ready to cut off electricity entirely. A dangerous scenario. Factories could shut down, leading to mass layoffs. The U.S. power grid could face severe disruptions, causing electricity prices to surge. Industries in Minnesota, Michigan, and New York could grind to a halt. This is no longer just a trade dispute. It could escalate into a full-blown energy crisis. Canada strikes back. Holding firm on tariffs against the U.S. electricity is not the only weapon Canada is using to retaliate. The Canadian government is maintaining a 25% tariff on multiple U.S. imports. What is Canada's objective? To force the U.S. to roll back tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and other exports. The affected goods include beer. American beer companies could lose millions due to rising costs. Vegetables. U.S. food exports to Canada will become more expensive, affecting both economies. Footwear and cosmetics. American retailers may suffer major losses due to higher import costs, but can Canada truly achieve its goal? Mark Carney. We will not lift these tariffs until the U.S. shows respect for Canada. The big question, will the U.S. back down? If the U.S. imposes even harsher tariffs on Canadian goods, what will happen next? Can the Canadian government maintain its firm stance in this trade war And if tensions keep escalating, which side will suffer the most? But this is far from over. The US is not just facing tariffs from Canada, but also from China and the European Union. This trade war could drive up the cost of goods in both countries, hurting consumers on both sides. If the US does not adjust its policies, could this trade dispute turn into a full-scale economic crisis? Canada's upcoming election, a showdown with the US. But this isn't just about trade, it's also a major political issue. In May, Canada will hold a general election, and Mark Carney is expected to become the new Prime Minister. If that happens, tensions between Canada and the US will escalate even further. Mark Carney's strong commitments continue imposing retaliatory tariffs on the US, protect Canada's economy from American protectionist policies, push for an independent trade strategy, reducing reliance on the US. But is Canada strong enough to confront the US? Let's not forget, Canada supplies over 4.3 million barrels of oil per day to the US. 50% of high-grade nickel used in U.S. defense and aerospace industries comes from Canada. 60% of U.S. aluminum is imported, and much of it comes from Canada. If tensions continue to rise, what could happen? The U.S. might impose higher tariffs, driving up costs across industries. Canada could retaliate by restricting exports of key resources. Is it time to negotiate a resolution, or will the U.S. and Canada continue down the path of economic conflict? If you want to understand more about this situation, stay tuned for the next update. China has just responded strongly to Trump's new tariffs, not only targeting American agricultural products, but also threatening critical high-tech industries and vital minerals. How will these strikes affect the U.S. economy and the global market under Trump's leadership? Let's break it down. China has chosen U.S. agricultural products as the first target in this new trade war. Items like soybeans, corn, chicken, and other agricultural products are now facing heavy tariffs. Agriculture is a strategic sector in the U.S. economy, particularly for the Midwestern states that heavily supported President Trump. The U.S. exported nearly $22 billion worth of soybeans to China in 2024. And these new tariffs could push American farmers into financial crisis, even leading to bankruptcies. If China continues imposing tariffs, the impact won't be limited to farmers. It will ripple through the U.S. economy, affecting everything from goods prices to export values. The markets will be disrupted, businesses will struggle to maintain supply chains, and consumers will face higher prices. This could lead to a negative spiral, reducing the competitiveness of American industries on the global market. However, agriculture is just the beginning of China's retaliation strategy. They are also targeting high-tech industries and crucial minerals like rare earth elements, which are essential for manufacturing semiconductors and military equipment. If China tightens its control over these exports, the U.S. will face major challenges in maintaining production of advanced technologies, especially in the defense sector. American tech companies will be forced to contend with higher costs and serious disruptions in supply chains. China could disrupt products like smartphones, computers, and even military gear, slowing production and causing widespread damage to the U.S. economy. If the U.S. cannot find alternative sources, these industries will pay a heavy price. These effects could weaken America's competitiveness in the global tech race, leaving it behind other global powers. Trump has made it clear that he will not back down. The U.S. administration believes these tariffs are necessary to address the trade imbalance and unfair practices from China. However, this also brings significant consequences for the U.S. economy. U.S. markets may face sudden price increases on consumer goods, from smartphones to cars. Companies will struggle to maintain supply chains and lower product prices. High-tech products may become more expensive, directly impacting consumers and potentially pushing the economy into inflation. This could reduce purchasing power, increase pressure on small businesses, and create a cycle of rising prices. Moreover, if this situation continues, the instability in the economy could lead to increased unemployment, affecting consumer spending and slowing the recovery of the U.S. economy. These tariff policies will have a widespread impact on all levels of American society. from consumers to investors. China can still deliver major blows to the U.S., especially by controlling rare earth minerals. These minerals are crucial for producing semiconductors and military equipment. If China continues to restrict these exports, the U.S. will struggle to maintain the production of cutting-edge technologies, which will hurt both the tech and defense industries. Specifically, American tech companies will have to seek alternative sources, which will be costly and cause major production delays.